Just been having an interesting debate with a few people online regarding the land reform issues and what the South African government are faced with dealing with over the coming year up to the next election next year. And I think I think this is something I want to share with everybody concerned. I'm particularly sharing this with people outside South Africa because I think they do not understand the South African dilemma, as well as people obviously who live in South Africa and people who have lived in South Africa for a long time, like myself. But to get this issue of what's fair, what's right, I'm up against quite a strong case where people feel, obviously a lot of black people, not all the black people, but a lot of black people feel it's still unjust and there shouldn't be as many white landowners in the country in comparison with blacks, and they think it's still extremely unfair, and there's a regime that has still kept them down even since the democratic elections that took place in 1994, which is difficult, and that's difficult for Cyril Ramaphosa to deal with, because his predecessors have not met the expectations of majority of the people in the country over that period of time. It's been badly managed, and it's allowed this whole far left wing philosophy to creep in again and make these things happen. I think black people were having their struggles through the 50s, through the 60s, through the 70s, well, before the 50s actually, but I'm just making those points, that's on record. And they eventually won their freedom in the 90s, and I think it's something which people don't really talk about because they don't feel easy talking about it. But let's remember that it was a white national party that said, okay, I've got to bring my people, the national democratic people of white people of South Africa, I've got to bring them through this process of change with me, which is what he did. He had to manage that process. He could have been, what's his name, to Blanche and draw your line in the sand now, guys, and let's have the fight. Let's have the physical fight here and now. Back then, or even before then. But no, what the white leadership did in South Africa is they reached a conclusion that there was one route forward if South Africa was going to be a successful country. It was to bring about as best as possible this peaceful change. And then it was in the hands of Nelson Mandela, who took up the challenge on that as well, who took up a very vibrant approach going forward. But I know there were many white people who were very much against the process that F.W. de Klerk was pushing towards, and it was a difficult one for the white people to overcome, but they did it. They overcame it, and African black people won their freedom in that period of time. Now, should they have I know the question is going to come up, should they have had to do that? Going further back in history, it was happening across the world. It wasn't just happening in South Africa. Yes, South Africa may be one of the countries that was slowest to reform in Africa. But, it was a country that, it was right at the end of the peninsula. There were a lot more white people living in South Africa who had lived there for hundreds of years. Don't forget, this isn't just people who, like me. If it was people like me who came there to live for 10 years or 20 years, sorry guy, you've got to go back now, we don't want you here anymore. Fair enough. These are people that have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, who only know that country as their country. It's their country. That's basically it. And they had to overcome this situation of how they bring about change, which they did peacefully, and it was peaceful. And the shift came, and the ANC took up the challenge with that, and it was a peaceful transformation. 24 years later, there's a situation where they are still grasping to gain votes. Now, to gain votes, they have to go further to the left. But what they're doing is once they go further to the left, they'll take the country into a total denial of freedoms. Because when you go far left, I'm not talking about a socialist, just a social type of government arrangement like there is in Australia, or like Jeremy Corbyn is trying to bring here in the UK, which he might succeed in a while. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about going really right to the left for a communist state with an infrastructure that's going to have, and that's another one of my vloggers commenting, no doubt. And that's what I'm saying is so, it's important people understand this. I'm talking about black people, white people, people inside South Africa, people on the outside. History's already proven itself many, many times over, and there are many cases. Because I just don't see how South Africa can gain any sort of revenues. And I know I keep on going, I think with my commercial head on, I know, but how are they going to draw income to look after the people? How are people going to live? How are they going to survive? I was talking to a young chap who was talking about farming. I make the point that I'm racist because I make the point that black people can't farm land. I didn't mean it in that sense. What I meant was a commercial farm. I'm not talking about planting a few vegetables in the backyard for your family to eat. I'm talking about commercial farming as an entity for revenues for the country to export and to develop a big business. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about farming. I'm not talking about so people can grow a few vegetables for themselves in their back garden, keep a goat and a cow and a. No, I mean, I'm talking about making the land work, making the land work. And this is what it's about. But it's not just about the farm now. I've seen far beyond that. But the most critical thing here is people have lost trust. It's not the question of they've lost trust with black people, have lost the trust of white people. They've actually lost the trust of the government. And the government is now having to manipulate itself into a situation by bringing on more lefty type supporters that can help it proceed to the next election and win the next election. I think it's got to be a question of really getting this across. The land issue is, to me, I can see as a little bit of a smokescreen in many respects. I mean, generally, these majority of all these people, when they argue this point about land, I think a lot of South Africans out there, simple South Africans out there, think, well, they're going to get some land. We're going to take it from the white man and they're going to give it to us. And it's as simple as that. So yeah, we'll vote for that that party, because that party is going to take this land away from the government, from the white man, and it's going to give it to us. But it's not going to happen that way, is it? We know that. I mean, land will all become state-owned. And then what are they going to do with it? And then all the people are going to disappear that know how to do the job, and they're not going to be around. And then there's going to be a lot of confusion going on. There's going to be a lack of commercial trade going on. There's going to be a lack of investment going on. And it's going to go exactly the way it shouldn't go. I think I said before in one of my podcasts, rather than going totally down that left-hand route, a radical, very radical move would be to let, okay, fine, if half or most of the country is so adamant they want to rule their country that way, South Africa's a big enough land, then you've got to divide it. You've got to divide it. It's got to be divided in a way that makes it so people with a more democratic viewpoint on the Western way of thinking live on one side of it, and people who have got a more socialistic approach to how they want it to work, they go and live on this side. I can see that working. But I don't think it's the right route for South Africa. And of course, to make that split, then of course, I know where the ANC are going to want to have the ownership of the land, and where they're going to say, well, this is where the minorities can go and live. But I would even say that would be a better option than going down the socialist route, communist route, should I say. Okay, I'm going to be sending another video out just now on a documentary which educated me on South Africa before I went to live there in 1980. It was made by the BBC and with David Dimbleby, a young David Dimbleby, who went over there to look at the white tribe of Africa and compared it with black consciousness over there as well. And it was, again, it's just something I've been pulling out all the archives and everything I used to know before I went to South Africa. So it's very, very, sorry, I keep on looking over there, by the way, because I keep on waiting for Prime Minister's question time. So I'll be sending that out shortly. Anyway, have a good day. Bye-bye.